Hi, my name is Luc Houle, and I beat the often path by creating Johnny Footwear. It's a shoe company that is eco-friendly, and our concept is that we encourage you to take our shoes, and when you're done with them, plant them in the ground, and they'll grow into a tree.
Welcome back to the Beat the Often Path podcast. I'm your host, Ross Palmer. On this show, we showcase a different kind of success story. We showcase people who have made it in unusual or interesting ways to help us think outside the box in our lives and in our careers. Often, of course, with an eco-friendly twist, since so few people are thinking about the planet when they decide to get into business. Well, my guest today is Luc Houle, creator of Johnny Footwear. This man just had a successful Kickstarter getting funding for his eco-friendly, biodegradable shoes. It's no secret that the billions of shoes around the world mostly end up in landfills where they will take more than 1,000 years to decompose, if ever. Well, how many pairs of shoes do you personally own? Yep, that should tell you how big of a problem this is. Rather than just bitch about it, Luc created a fully biodegradable, cruelty-free shoe with a twist. Not only will the shoe completely biodegrade if you bury it, it will also sprout and grow an apple tree in its place. Inspired by Johnny Appleseed, let's hear how Luc turned a truly novel idea into a reality. So here is the amazing story of Luc Houle. Well, that's a pretty great thing. First of all, your name is awesome because it sounds like cool when you pronounce it. I wish my name was that cool, or cool. But I'm very honored to have you on the show. I came across your idea. I think it's an incredible concept. It's so novel, and it's so far outside the box that it's just instantly a conversation starter, and that's gotten you some earned media attention I've seen. You've been on some big shows. You're on the Drew Barrymore show, various other things, if I'm not mistaken. So tell us a little bit about your mission, your journey. How did you get started? How did you come up with this novel idea?
Thank you. I've been really blessed in that I've gotten a lot of success recently with media attention and stuff. But I think it's because I'm addressing a problem that not a lot of other companies are addressing at this point. And we all know that it's important to take care of the environment. We need more sustainable solutions. But it's one of those areas where you don't really think about footwear that much. It's just a necessity, right? So you're like, all right, I'll buy whatever's comfortable, whatever looks cool, right? But I want to have those two components, but then also add in eco-friendly. So I just started brainstorming, and honestly, it took a long time to come to this product in particular, and how I could make a greater impact in the world through my expertise, which is designing shoes.
Well, that's a fabulous introduction. And for those who haven't seen this product, we'll pull it up. We'll put it on the screen as we go. But there's a literal apple seed in the center of this shoe. It's the core. Is it one apple seed in the middle?
Yeah, so it's one apple seed per shoe.
Okay.
And the way that it works is, so originally I was like, hey, I should come up with a biodegradable shoe. But other companies have done that with mixed success, right? And there are a variety of reasons I could list off as to why they were successful or why they weren't. But the biggest thing was that they were trying to go after the, more like the hippie consumer kind of thing. I didn't want to do that, though. I just want a cool, stylish shoe that looks good. You can wear with any outfit. But I also wanted a hook, right? Something that would make people kind of pay attention to it. And when I realized, hey, you have to put it in the ground for it to biodegrade anyway, it just kind of came naturally. Why not just put a tree seed in there and have it grow into an apple tree,
That's so funny. So did you pick, which variety of apple is it first of all? Is it all the same?
That's a good question. So originally I hadn't even chosen it when I launched the Kickstarter. I was just like, I'm going to go with a standard, maybe like a gala apple or something like that. But fortunately, I don't know what you would call it, but like somebody who owns an apple orchard, they contacted
an orchardier.
Like,
I don't know.
An orchardier, exactly. So they contacted me and they're like, hey, you should really think about varying the seeds, because you might create an issue of having too much of like the one species out there, depending on how successful you are. He's like, so I'd like to work with you on kind of listing off a few different varieties for different regions. And so he's been very helpful in guiding me in the right direction, which is really cool.
So you're going to have multiple seeds when all is said and done.
Yes. Yeah. A variety of different species. Yeah.
Talk about things that you can't predict when you're starting a business. You say, what if it's so successful and there's too much of one kind of apple tree? I don't think a lot of people have had to worry about that particular problem when they're starting a business.
True, true. I mean, hey, this is, fingers crossed.
Yeah, fingers
But
crossed.
it is my goal to beat John Chapman. I don't know if you looked into the company a little bit for like the name.
Yes.
But so I named the company Johnny after Johnny Appleseed, who's also known as John Chapman. And one of the company's goals now is to exceed the amount of trees that he planted when he was alive. So, I mean,
What
right
a
now,
great goal.
yeah, we're just inching towards it at the moment, but hopefully one day, right?
How many trees did he plant? That I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's a mixed variety. Like there's a lot of different estimates, but the consensus is like it should be roughly around 50,000.
50,000.
So I'm looking to beat 50,000 trees planted.
Okay, that's great. And you started with Kickstarter, you said. When did you actually put up the page and start going after that funding?
So I started the Kickstarter on October 12th, and we completed it 40 days later. We were successfully funded, which was really nice. So we beat our goal of 70,000 Canadian, and it was an adventure. I'm going to be honest, because I'd done one Kickstarter before, and it was successful. But at the time, Kickstarter was really they were really helping push it forward by making it a project that they love, and so they were investing in marketing on their end. But this time it was more on my end to do it. So Kickstarter didn't really help push it forward. So it was a little bit more challenging than I was expecting, but I'm very happy with where we got and how we got there.
So set a goal of $70,000. Now, what did you have before you actually started the Kickstarter? Did you have a prototype? Did you just have the concept? What had you solved up to that point?
Yeah, good question. So in order to launch on Kickstarter, you do need a prototype. They require you to have if it's a product, right? To have proof of concept, if you will. And so I worked on it for about 3 years, and I developed technology. There was some setbacks because 2020 was a challenging time for everybody. So originally I was going to launch in 2020, but just because of the state of the world and how everything, played out, factories shut down. Even one of the prototype factories that I enlisted, they actually got repossessed by the Chinese government and then reused for PPE production because it was just in need, right, worldwide. So there were some challenges, but I'm really happy to say that, we got through them, above them. And so I had the prototype, and then I launched with the video and a bunch of imagery and all the marketing stuff.
Cool. Do you have a background? I know you've worked in fashion before, but do you have a background in any of that chemical stuff? Was that all stuff you had to research? How did you go about the more technical part of things?
That was, I was really fortunate that I was able to partner up with chemical engineers who they know their business. I know that it works because I've seen the studies and I've seen the proof in the pudding. But if you were to put me in front of that kind of world, oh, geez, it would be terrible. So I let them do their job as well as they can. And then I did my job as well as I could.
That's super great. And when you met these people, were they excited to take this project on board? Were they excited to put their skills and brain power to use on something fun and novel like this? Was it interesting for them?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things where I think the world needs a little bit more of this kind of initiative in all aspects, right? So if we can find ways to make the majority of the products that we consume biodegradable and then eliminate plastics altogether, that would be the ideal situation, right?
Yeah.
So they're definitely on board with that. That's one of their core missions as well, is making sure to reduce that plastic impact. Because right now we have a shifting conversation where we're bringing everything towards CO2 neutral, right? We want to get CO2 neutral, and I think that's great, and that's definitely an important goal. But we also have to concentrate on other impacts to the environment, like plastic in particular, because even if we get to CO2 neutral, but then we flooded our oceans with plastic, then we're not really doing ourselves any favors, right?
Yep. Completely agree. And of course, the first thought that I had when I came across your website, which is hilarious, I guess you thought of this and all other people apparently think like me. You think of a biodegradable shoe, and the first thought that pops in your head is, I'm going to be out running somewhere in the rain, and this thing's going to dissolve on my feet like acid. It's just going to melt away, and you're going to be stuck without shoes. And then I scroll down on the page, and just about a third of the way down the page, it says, it will not biodegrade on your feet. I was like, touche, you got this one. Is that something? First of all, how do you solve that? How do you know that it will degrade at the right time and not at the wrong time? And was that a concern that you had? Or is that something that a lot of people asked in the Kickstarter?
It was. So even before I launched it, I made sure to pool, all of my friends on what they thought about the idea, if it was worth pursuing. And the first thing that a lot of people do ask you, right, is yeah, but it's going to fall apart on my feet. Like, what's up with that? So it was really important that I be super clear, and I repeat it as many times as I can. It's not going to fall apart on your feet. Don't worry. You're not going to turn into Groot as you're running through the rain. It needs a combination of like moisture and like a consistent underground environment in order for it to start going. And so the way that the compound works is that when you plant it in the ground, it takes like a little while for it to start up. But essentially, once a few microbes come in and start to chow down on it, saying, is this a viable food source for decomposition? The chemical inside of it starts engaging, and then it'll essentially make them go through a process called quorum sensing. And then that process is what attracts other microbes saying, hey, this is an awesome food source, come eat here. And so that can't happen while you're just walking around above ground, or even if they're a little moist and they're kind of hanging out in the closet, you don't need to worry, it's going to be okay. It has to be underground for probably about a month before it really kicks in.
I love that you said that you might turn into Groot during a run, because I hadn't even considered that, but that's a pretty scary idea. I know that there's that old-fashioned form of torture where they held people flat and they grew bamboo underneath them, and bamboo grows so fast that it actually will pierce. It's horrific. It can be done if you slice off the bamboo. So now I have this vision of 2 apple trees growing through my feet as I'm running. But that's not going to happen.
Yeah, no torture involved. Don't worry.
No torture. Yeah, torture free. That'll be 3/4 of the way down the page. But that's super amazing. So you've seen this at this point, obviously. You've seen it with your own eyes. You've buried a shoe. You've seen the process. What does that look like when you've actually buried it?
So I wish I could have videotaped the process happening, but it's not super pretty anyway, because decomposition isn't pretty. So it's not a great marketing tactic to show something covered in mold. But the way that it works is actually, I didn't like personally plant a shoe because I didn't have the time to do that, right? Because it takes about 3 years before it's fully biodegraded and it launches out. So what we did was, instead, it was like independent verification through third-party laboratories where they tested out the compound and made sure everything's working. And they're actually the ones who gave us the number that'll be 53% biodegraded in 18 months. So that means that, like, even though it's not fully biodegraded, after about 1.5 years, the tree seed should launch out of the soil, because enough of it will have decomposed around it that it should be able to start germinating at that point.
That's incredible. What types of environments can apple trees even grow in? What climate does it need?
It's a good question. The reason that I chose apple trees is because, since I'm tackling the North American market, they can actually grow in the majority of North America. There's different varieties that thrive in different environments, but there's some areas that's just not going to happen. So if you plant them in the Arizona desert, it's just not going to work, right? But the majority of the rest of North America should be good. But the one thing to keep in mind, though, is that even if you buy them and you're in Arizona, you might not be able to plant them in your backyard, but you can throw them away, and then they'll go to the landfill, where they're still going to decompose. So they won't become an apple tree, but at least you're not creating additional plastics in the environment.
I love that. And when you say it and you talk about it, it's like so many of these things, you have to ask yourself, why have we not done this sooner? That's always the greatest thing that I find when I talk to entrepreneurs such as yourself. Why do we need to wear shoes that take 1,000+ years to decompose, if ever, right? Why have we done this way when we can just swap a few things out? So what were some of the challenges that you faced? Obviously not going into any kind of technical details, but what were some of the things that you had to overcome when you were thinking about the problem of making a biodegradable shoe?
Good question. Man, there was a lot of different stepping stones to get to where we got. And the biggest one was, how do we make it fully biodegradable but still look good, right? Because there's expectations in footwear. And we've gotten to a point now where, luckily, the technology's caught up to us, and we can make something that's biodegradable, but also look cool. Like, we don't have to use crepe outsoles like back in the day, right? So once upon a time, if you wanted to have a biodegradable shoe, it had to be crepe outsole, and then that didn't last very long. Number one, because the traction is just not as great as other ones. It's not as durable as PETs and stuff like that. So there was that component of every little thing, like even like the stitching, right? You don't think about the stitching, but a lot of those are plastic based. So we had to switch to like organic cotton thread instead, right? So little things like that, so little adjustments. But I was really fortunate that I have a good friend. His name's Kevin O'Reilly, and he's out in China the majority. Actually, now I think like full time ever since 2020 hit. He used to do 6 months in Canada, 6 months overseas. But he's been helping me coordinate with factories and get everything up and running. And he's got 30 years of experience in manufacturing, right? So in supply chains. So that's been really, really helpful for me overall.
We're going to switch the script a little bit here, and I'm going to do a little bit of an ad, but I'm not sponsored by Squarespace. Dang it, I mentioned their name. Crap! But what I will say is that I have a marketing agency, and my marketing agency helps out eco-friendly brands, B Corps, and nonprofits. It's called Aloha Marketing, ALOA marketing.com. I seek to amplify stories just like this podcast and brands that deserve to be heard, people who are doing good in the world. So if you know somebody who's in need of a website redesign or e-commerce business or general SEO, digital marketing, any of those types of things, be sure to head over to my own website, alohamarketing.com, that's ALOA marketing.com, and schedule a consultation. Great, see, I can sponsor my own podcast. See, Mom, it wasn't all a waste of time. And now, back to the show. Maybe let's rewind a bit and talk a bit about your life up to this point. So, were you always entrepreneurial? Were you the person who had a lemonade stand as a kid? Was that something always on your mind, or did you do a hard pivot at some point?
I remember being a kid and planning a dog walking business when I was like 9, which was weird because I was allergic to dogs, but I was still like, hey, this is something that's needed.
There's big money there.
Yeah, so I think a part of me has always appreciated, the entrepreneurial pursuit. But to say that I really got into it, I mean, this was a life path that I wasn't even expecting to take. When I was younger, I really just wanted to make cartoons. And so I went to school for animation.
Whoa.
I learned, yeah. And I learned how to do that whole deal. Like I learned how to work with Photoshop, Illustrator, and then Maya and Autodesk and all those programs, right? So when I actually got out into the field after graduating, I did it for like 1 year, and I realized, I'm better on the business side of things, because instead of being promoted into a lead animator role or something like that, they instead threw me into production coordination, and they were like, "Yeah, this is a good fit for you." And so I just started managing like the teams out there, or coordinating the teams, I guess. And then that led into eventually, breaking into shoes after. So I was hanging out it was 2008. The crash happened, and I was looking for work because our production shut down, which is, it was on schedule, everything was good. But then I was looking for work, and I was reaching out to all these studios. Nobody was hiring because there was no money at the time to start new productions. And I got a call from my uncle, and my uncle was like, "Hey, I was thinking about you. And I know right now you're unemployed. It's been about 3 weeks. Like, would you want to come check out what I'm doing?" And to be honest, like, he was just the cool uncle with a bunch of great stories, but I didn't know what he did. So I was like, "What do you do?" And he's like, "I sell shoes." I was like, "Oh, that sounds terrible. I don't want to do that."
Very romantic.
Like, no. Yeah, but he's like, no, come on out, check it out. So I went out there, and it turns out selling shoes is legit, just driving around to a bunch of stores and being like, "Hey, you want to hang out and talk a little bit? This is what I'm doing. If there's a need for it, awesome. If not, cool. No problem. But let's be friends, right?" And I realized really quickly I could definitely do that. So that kind of launched me into footwear, and now I've been doing it for the last 12 years, I guess.
Okay. And at some point in that journey, you realized that there was this monumental waste component.
Yeah.
When did that start to strike you?
So I worked for a few different companies, and the first one was a fashion house called Ziggy New York. And what was really impressive about this was that we were rivaling Steve Madden, which was great. So we were like the only like real competitor at the time for them, and it was fast fashion. So we were pumping through tons and tons and tons of shoes, like legit hundreds of thousands. And once I was looking at the impact of that, I was like, "Oh man, like this is awesome because we're in sales, so it's not a big deal." But when I got into manufacturing after, and I really started like doing shoe design properly and all that, I started learning about the compounds that go into the shoes, and that's when I realized, hey, there's an issue here, because there are billions and billions of pairs sold every year, and if all of them are made of plastic, then we have a huge problem on our hands for the landfills and the oceans, right? And the majority of them are. Majority of them are made of like, EVA, of PET, various different, different plastic compounds that have different names. But at the end of the day, it still sticks around for about 1,000 years. So realizing that, that's when I was like, I need to do something. So I think I did research for probably a good year before I even got close to where I needed to be for Johnny.
But why did you need to do something when you could have just done things the way they'd always been done? You could have just made more money. You could have just kept polluting the planet. Why did you feel that you needed to do something?
It's a good question. That's a really good question. I think everybody in life, like everybody has their own life to live, and some people have strictly monetary pursuits, right? And that's great. If that's your deal, awesome. But when I was defining my values, I want to say like 3-4 years ago, I started defining my values, and I started realizing that, at least for me, like a big part of why I do what I do is that I want to leave the world a better place than when I came in. And so, just selling shoes, cool. Designing cool shoes that people connect with, that's awesome too. Like that's definitely impactful. But I want to make sure that it was positive in a larger way. And so if I could change the way the shoes are made, even, if Johnny is successful, amazing. But if everybody starts waking up to this too, and all footwear starts changing towards a sustainable option, then, I've done something good. So
yeah. Many people, when they're thinking of a product, they're thinking of solving something, but you recognize, which I think is genius, the need to have a hook, a marketing, a brand forward hook. And that hook, of course, being the Appleseed, because anybody could just plant an apple tree. So in a sense, that's irrelevant, right? But it's a great story and it's a great point. And what we've seen is that a lot of the coolest businesses out there, they have some kind of hook that gets people interested. And then you slide in the deeper message, which is sort of secondary, but it was really the primary point of all of it from your perspective. The primary point is making shoes that are better for the environment. And this other thing is a way to get people like Drew Barrymore to say, hey, that's a cool product. Whoa, what are you doing? To get people like me to say, hey, that's awesome. And here we are. I think that's
true.
Awesome. Great.
Yeah. If you wanted to, you could go to the grocery store right now, buy an apple, and then
right, exactly. This is not a hard problem to solve of any variety that you choose.
Mm-hmm. But it's true. It was just something that it would open up people to the idea, because it's one thing to say, hey, my shoe biodegrades, and people are like, all right, cool, like that's pretty sweet. It's another thing to say my shoes grow into apple trees. At least for me, I was like, oh, this is genius, and I wish there was some cool story that I was walking down the street and there was an apple tree that was like blooming out of a plastic bottle or something. There's no cool story like that. I was actually just driving to Ottawa, and I've got this thing where I really like driving with the music off. It just gives me time to think, right? And I just kind of go through different things in my head of like, I just think on one problem. And so I had thought of the biodegradable shoe. I had worked through the compound and like how we can make that work. I was like, but how do I make people pay attention to this? And it took me like 6 hours of just kind of running through, how that would work. And then the concept design. I remember getting to my buddy's house in Ottawa, and he was like, hey buddy, how you doing? And I just like ran towards pencil and paper, and I was like, I got to jot this down really fast. I'm like, I figured out how we're going to integrate this into the soul. And then it took life from there.
To that end, in your Kickstarter, were you expecting to meet that goal? Were you surprised? Did it take off on its own? Did you have to put in an extreme amount of effort? How did you actually do that?
It was an extreme amount of effort. Okay. So, I wish it was easy. To be honest, like the crazy part is once the ball was rolling, I was already 3/4 of the way through the Kickstarter. So it took a lot to get it up and running right off the bat. I put together a list of probably about 5,000 reporters and publishers and producers, and then I just legit emailed every single one. So I would stay up until 2 a.m. just writing up these emails and scheduling them for 8 a.m. so it didn't look like I was emailing them at 2 a.m. But yeah, I just emailed everybody that I could, and then found those emails where I could. Went through a lot of mastheads for newspapers, and yeah, just ran with it. But even before that, I had listed out in my business plan about 5 different marketing strategies to really test and push, right? So one of them was Facebook advertisements and Instagram advertisements. And then I'd already listed out my demographic. and just targeting them, right? But then A/B testing it against other demographics, etc. The other component was using Reddit to post to subreddits. At the time, I was a moderator of our shoes.
Wow, cool.
Yeah, so I could push it through. And then there's a few other strategies as well, right? And I started testing out to see which one would work the best. And it was okay. Like all of it was kind of okay. The Facebook ads and Instagram ads were terrible. That was a waste of time. But the thing that really stuck was when I got my first article in Blog.to, and that really started getting some attention. And then all of a sudden, Global News called me up to book a segment. So I did a segment with them. Newsweek, like a bunch of City TV, a bunch of different stations started calling me up. And when that global article hit, that global segment hit, I got about $10,000 in one day of funding. And I was like, oh, wow, this is worth pursuing. And so then I just went all in on that strategy, and I let the other ones kind of trickle out. Because like if you're spending a lot of time on Reddit, but you're not getting any actual tangible sales out of it, then it's not really worth your time, right?
Yeah. That's really cool. So when you were pitching these people, what were you saying? Hey, I've got this new idea that's going to change everything. Will you feature it, or what were you asking for in those emails?
So originally I tried a few different tactics for it. And the first one was just sending out a press release saying, hey, this is what I'm working on. This is what it is. It just launched. If you want to cover it. That was met with okay results. What I found was a lot more effective was, hey, I've got this thing. It's pretty cool. I think it would make a great story. If you're into it, I'd love to work with you on it. And then I found that was getting a lot of it because it's quite a bit more human. And it's honest, right? Like I'm not a PR agent. I've never done PR in my life. I'm just a dude who started a company, right? With what I think is a cool idea and hoping that other people find it cool too. And luckily that resonated pretty well.
Amazing. 5,000 emails. That's the stuff that nobody wants to talk about. You can't tweet that quickly. You can't put that into a pithy one-liner for Instagram. That's just boots on the ground, going hard.
It's tough, man. It's tough. But that's the things that you need to do at the beginning that aren't scalable, right? Like, and I realize that it's not scalable. I can't spend all day, every day, just sending out emails to producers and journalists, right? But it's important to do at the beginning because, like, if I'm not going to do it, nobody's going to do it, right?
Yeah. And the fact that you did it yourself instead of outsourcing that probably also contributed to your success because only you could maybe sell your vision. Nobody else can quite put it the right way.
Yeah. I think that's a big part of it. I think you're right. I know my product best, and honestly, I didn't want to get in front of cameras. Like that sounded terrifying to me at the time. To get out in front of the world and be like, hey, this is me. This is what I'm doing. It's a lot of pressure, but if I wasn't going to do it, the project wasn't going to succeed. And that's the kind of motivation that you need to really get things done. And it gets you out of your comfort zone. And I'm happy to say now, if you put me in front of a camera, I'm very comfortable.
You're doing great.
Thank you.
No problem at all.
But that's, it's good to challenge yourself and find out what you're capable of. And you never know. I mean, you might even find out that you actually enjoy it.
I think there are a few things that you've learned, but what are some of the most unusual things that you have taken away from this process? Or what are things that you now believe that you didn't used to believe, or surprising things that you've learned that maybe go against the grain?
Okay, so one of the surprising things that I actually encountered was that you should not call a shoe vegan if there's any animal byproducts, even if it's like cruelty-free. Because very quickly I got shut down by the vegan community for calling my shoe vegan. But what I also learned was that it's a very welcoming community in the sense that they just want you to educate yourself. And so once I changed it to cruelty-free, then vegans were very happy with it. They're like, all right, that's cool. Like, we're still not going to buy your shoes, but we're not going to give you a hard time because you're trying to do good, right? So what I definitely learned was fact check everything before you put it out.
And in that scenario, they're saying, I'm not going to buy your product because it has trace amounts of beeswax, but I am going to buy harmful plastic. Would that be the choice that they're making instead?
Well, I mean, like, given the opportunity, I don't know. Like, so what I'm planning to do
is there a vegan shoe?
There are vegan shoes, but they use plastic.
So that's what I'm saying. So that's an interesting ethical, moral choice. You're saying I'd rather do this than that. And as somebody who was vegan for a couple years, I just find those types of like beeswax not okay or whatever else you use, but coming back to the 1,000 years of never decomposing, that is okay. I'm always amazed by those types of value judgments.
It's a conundrum, but it did inspire me to start working on a vegan shoe that's truly vegan. So
Cool.
I'm working on one that's not going to have the beeswax, but will still be water resistant just because of like a thicker weave that's a little bit tighter. And so hopefully that'll work. So I'm still in testing stages for that. But I'd like to give them an option, right? That works with their values. So
very cool. Well, I think, yeah, what you've done is truly outstanding. It's a very awesome idea. It's a noble thing. I hope that it becomes incredibly successful. And if it did, aside from matching and exceeding John Chapman, old Johnny Appleseed, and 50,000 trees planted, what would be the best thing that could happen in the next 1 year or 5 years? How do you see this going if everything works out?
Yeah, I'd like to make Johnny a household name. That would be ideal, right? Like, I think some companies that are socially motivated, like Tom's, right? Tom's did a great job of really exploding onto the market because their message connected with people. And I'm really hoping to get Johnny out the same way, where, it connects with people. And when you're walking in the street and you see a sneaker with red laces, then you automatically think, they're wearing Johnny's. So that would be ideal.
Very cool. Well, I support you wholeheartedly from my little area. I think it's really great. I'm very glad to have met you. Thank you again for taking the time to sit down with me and join me on this show. I do want to give the floor to you, so I like to let you wrap this up. So whatever you want to say, whatever you want to promote, the floor is yours. So take it away and we'll end up this episode.
Thank you. No, and honestly, thank you for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak about what I'm doing and let your viewers know a little bit more about my little company. So if you're interested in checking out the sneakers themselves, you can just go to www.johnnyfootwear.com and take a look. And if it's something that connects with you, then you can pick up a pre-order pair. We're going to be shipping them out August 2022.
August 2022. Okay, great. And what's the price on those shoes?
They go for 130 Canadian, roughly $100 USD.
Okay, sounds good. Sounds like a great thing. And with that, again, thank you. And the official podcast is over.